Hello Potters and welcome back to the Pottery Plus studio. Happy New Year! I have a project for us today that is in honor of the new year, and it is something that I call a gratitudes and resolutions jar. It's just a place for you to write those things down, write little notes to yourself throughout the year of things that you're grateful for or things that you want to get resolved this new year and keep track of, and then you can kind of reflect back on it at the end of the year. It's just a simple lidded form with a few little decorations that are very open to interpretation, so you can definitely make this project your own, and it's going to start on the wheel. So let's jump over there and I'll show you the first step. Okay, welcome to the wheel. I'm starting today with about 1 pound and a couple of ounces. I was aiming towards a pound and it was a little over when I measured, so for this I thought that was fine. And this clay body is SB red, and so I wedged it, and now I'm gonna go ahead and center to begin our jar. This will look familiar. This is not really anything special here. Hi, birdie. If centering is something you're working on, the way that I do it, that I have found is helpful as kind of a person with not huge upper body strength, is to put my palm at about 6 o'clock and just lean. And my fist on top is not really doing anything other than to keep the clay from shooting up. But kind of using the weight of my body to lean is how I have found I can center with the greatest ease. All right, now I'm just gonna open my pot, drilling straight down. And then moving my thumbs away, giving them a little break and getting some water. And now I'm gonna open the bottom of my jar, keeping my thumbs nice and flush against the bottom of the pot. And I don't want this jar to be very big. So I don't want to open this really wide. Kind of want this to be a little bit of a petite pot. And I'm just smoothing out the bottom a little bit here, working from the outside in towards that middle point, and then from the inside out, and making sure I have a nice corner like right here, so there's not any bulk right there. Sometimes we can let it get too rounded there and we end up leaving material at the bottom of the pot, making it a little bit heavy. But you know what? For our gratitude and resolutions jar, I don't think heaviness would be the end of the world. It's just going to be holding scraps of paper. So if you leave a little excess in the bottom, I say give grace to yourself and maybe don't get too hung up on that for this project. Okay, now I'm just pulling walls. I'm going to pull gently, because the style of jar that I'm doing it's the same style from the little bit more in-depth jar tutorial that I did about what I think is the easiest form of a jar, or a lidded form. And it's where you put the flange in the lip, and then the lid itself is just going to be a flat piece. But what I need to keep in mind with this process is that when I'm pulling the walls, I need to pull and then release my pressure at about the top ½ inch of the pot, so that I have enough material to flatten it out really nice and cut a flange in to this top edge. It's not much surface area to be doing such a kind of finite amount of work. So I like to leave myself plenty of excess material at the top to work with for that. Because even if you leave a good amount right in the rim, sometimes when you start to put downward pressure with your tool that we're going to use like this to make the corner, it'll push down into a weaker part of the wall and cause it to collapse. So that's why I say like a ½ inch. I'm leaving this wall a little thicker from here to maybe right about here. I don't know if you can see that. from that nail mark I just made and up, I'm just leaving it kind of bulky. A little bit thicker than that 1/4 inch wall that we're always going for, okay? So now I'm easing up my pressure as I'm getting to the top of the pole to keep that extra material there. And when I was measuring and I said I was okay with that extra couple ounces over a pound, that was kind of why there is that point in this process where a little bit of excess comes in handy. And like I said, I don't want this jar to be too big, so I'm just gonna smooth out the edges. Or smooth out the walls, I mean. I thought I might put a bit of throwing rings into this. And maybe just trim out a little bit of excess to give a shadow underneath the bottom of it. But I don't know, there's something about throwing rings, you know, they're so natural and part of the process. I just thought that kind of maybe seemed appropriate for the theme of this project. You know, being kind of just about reflection and that kind of thing. I won't go too much into it and start blabbering. I did see a comment recently that said to talk less, so no, I'm sorry, I shouldn't misquote. It specifically was like, talk less about personal things. So for those of you who don't like that stuff, I'm keeping it short. Okay, and then I am gonna put just a little throwing ring in the side. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so when you're doing a lidded form like this, typically you want to make alterations like that before you put in the flange, meaning the little edge where the ledge where the lid is going to sit. You want to do any little adjustments like that I was just doing, you want to do that first, because otherwise you can knock the flange off center. So I'm going to recenter the lip, just make sure that it's still flat and centered. And then using this doesn't have to be one of these style of ribs. You can use any tool for this as long as it has a nice angled corner on it like that. That's the important part, and it needs to be kind of fine. If it's like a thick corner, that can sometimes create problems. And you guys, I was gonna try to see if I could get this like at an angle where it was really nice and visible, but I think I'm gonna have to maybe rely on my left hand a little bit. Okay, so I'm just digging that corner in, pressing down and supporting it underneath with this left finger. I just want to shore up that corner a little bit. I think that's it. If you can kind of do it in one quick motion, that's sort of the best way to do a flange. The more you have to piddle with it, the more delicate it gets. And you know, this little shelf here that we've just created can definitely break and get weak. And that looks fine to me. Again, this jar is not gonna be heavily, you know, used for utility. So that flange can be good enough. It's a little bit less bulky than what I would prefer, but this is a small piece, so there's only so much material to work with. Okay, and I'm gonna leave that alone, maybe round it off just a little bit. And just double check that the corner doesn't have bulk in it. Because if your corner is, again, kind of that rounded idea of a rounded corner, your lid does not sit down into it as nicely. And here's the point where it's tempting just to fiddle, and so I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna stop. Just gonna quickly dry out the middle. Yes, I did just bump the flange if you saw that, but I don't think I moved it, fortunately. Okay, so to do the measurement for the lid, if you've been here before, you might have seen me do this. I've got my calipers, and with them crossing over, because when you're taking a measurement on the interior of something, you want the calipers crossed so that you can get the most accurate measurement. So I'm gonna extend them to the width of the flange and then gently move them away. I'm gonna put my little jar. Oh, it's cute. I am happy with the profile. I'm gonna get some paper. I would honestly be preferring to do this with a pencil because I've grabbed a Sharpie here, but I would rather be doing this with something with more of a fine point, but this will work just for the demonstration. I'm gonna mark this measurement very, as thoroughly as I can and get it right up against the edge of the calipers. And the reason why I'm doing that is because for the next measurement to compare and make sure the lid is the right size, I'm gonna need the caliper to be open. So by doing this, I make sure that I can get that measurement right, even though I'm changing the position of the calipers. So I'm gonna put my calipers to the side again. Make sure that the little wing nut on the calipers is tight when you move them to the side. Make sure that is tight so it's holding that measurement in place. And then you can be pretty easy about just setting it down for when you need it. And I've got my next my next piece of clay that I'll use to make the lid. I probably don't need as much clay as I grabbed for this. I think this is probably about 1/4 pound. But this process lends itself to trimming some excess away, so that'll be okay, but I don't think I'll be using all of this. So same centering process. The only thing is, this is gonna be a lid that I spread out flat and then leave a bit of excess in the middle to create the knob of the jar. So this is a very self-contained piece and it doesn't require any pulling. Well, I guess you could pull if you wanted to make a hollow knob, but I'm not gonna do that. This knob is gonna be so small that the weight of it is not gonna really present any problem. You know, when you need a knob to be hollow is when it's kind of larger and will add a lot of bulk and a lot of weight to the piece if it's not hollow. So fortunately, this project doesn't really have that problem. So I've got it centered. Now I'm just going to kind of start spreading it out and sort of pushing that little bit. I kind of want a small knob on this jar, so I don't need to isolate out a lot of excess, just a little bit to save there in the middle to make a little small knob out of. And then the rest of this I just need to push out, get it measured to match my calipers, and then trim away the excess and just make sure that the thickness is right for the size of the flange. It's a pretty shallow flange, so I'm gonna need this lid to be pretty thin so that it doesn't go over the top of the flange when the lid is resting in the flange. We don't usually want that. Sometimes you have to go through a few of those just to learn, but you definitely kind of want the lid to have that appearance of resting inside the flange, not like on top of the jar or, yeah, peeking over the edge. Okay, so let's see. I'm gonna take my calipers and mark. I'm just using one side of the caliper for this. I'm just tilting it down, and that's a little bit smaller. I think just because I had to angle it, it sort of changed the measurement just a tiny bit. But I always find myself having to trim lids down anyway, so I don't think that small amount is going to make too much of a difference. But when I trim the excess off, I will go a little bit outside of that marking, because you know, you can always trim away excess, but you can't add it back once you've taken it away. So better for it to be too big than too small on this step. And I can kind of already tell that's a little thick, It's a little bit thick, so I'm gonna do one more pass over of just sort of thinning it out again, thinning it, spreading it, and then measure again. And I think that should get us about there. And then I will work on the knob, and then all I have to do after I get this thrown is just leave it alone until it is ready to come off the bat. Because after this step, what's nice about this process is after this step, the lid is done. All the lid has to do is dry and make sure you get the right fit on it. And that's it for the lid. So a little bit of trimming might be necessary, but otherwise it's pretty self-contained to just a throwing, making a product that only requires really pretty much a throwing process. Okay, that looks a lot better. I think that'll be about right. So now I'm just going to clean this up a little bit before I finish up the knob. I also cut at a little bit of an angle when I'm trimming this style of lid. You can see that. I'm probably not really showing, but just a slight angle. Because again, when you're setting the lid, it's just all about kind of the usability, but when you're setting the lid down in the flange, it kind of, if the flange is going in like that a little bit, if it's kind of tucked at the bottom, sometimes it sets down a little nicer in the pot. All right, so next, kind of the fun part to me, part where you get to really see this element of it come to life. I just want kind of a simple, small, rounded knob for this. And I always tend to flatten, like I just can't get away from like flattening the top. And I think maybe I just want it to kind of be domed on the top. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Maybe bring that thin part in just a little touch more. Yeah, I think I can live with that. Clean it up just a little bit more. And then before I let this to dry, I'm going to double check my measurement with the caliper. That looks pretty good, but again, it's a touch. It'll probably need to be trimmed back just a touch, but I prefer that than having it be too small and fall inside of the jar. So that's the throwing step. We're gonna move over to the decorating step, and I'll show you how I'm gonna decorate mine. And I'll let you know if this lid needed any trimming. And yeah, I'll see you over there for the next step. I did need to come back in and trim my lid, so I centered it on my foam bat and then cut off just a little bit from around the edge using my needle tool and my small knife that you see there. After I did that, the edge was kind of harsh, so I went back in with a loop tool and just trimmed and rounded that edge and spent a little bit more time cleaning that up, rounding it off, and making it nice and smooth. While I had the foam bat set up, I couldn't resist but to trim the bottom of the pot a little bit as well. So here I was just trying to take out some weight. I didn't want to change the silhouette too much, so I just took a bit off the sides and then some out of the center, but I wasn't trying to create a foot here, just taking weight out and cleaning it up a little bit. All right, and we're back for the decorating step. So what I've got here is a small piece of slab, and I have some stamps. And what I'm going to do on this little piece of slab for my decoration is I'm just going to stamp in the words 2025. I had best of intentions to have number stamps ready for this so that I didn't have to spell it out, but I believe they got left in my classroom. Teachers, if you're watching, you'll know that feeling all too well. Once something enters your classroom, it rarely ever makes it back home. So, but anyway, I think this will be cute to spell it out like this. 2025. And then, I thought about doing some other little decorative pieces on this, but I think I actually just want to keep it really simple, just with the words. And also because the piece is small, I don't have a lot of space for decoration, so I want this little bit to also be pretty small. I don't want it to, you know, take up the whole side of the jar or anything. So just working gently with my stamps. Remember, with stamps, you always want to be gentle because they'll... My dog hears something. Anyway, you can poke a hole through your clay really easy, especially when you're using a thin slab like this. So just be gentle. All right, and there's my 2025. So I'm gonna just cut that out. And I'm not really gonna be concerned about it being like perfectly even of a rectangle or square. Okay, pardon the interruption. My coworker was being very rude and screaming. I think she saw the neighbors or something through the fence, but I think we're good now. Okay, so I'm just finishing up trimming my little placard that I'm gonna attach to the side of my jar. Again, not trying to, you know, doesn't need to be perfect. Before I attach, I'm gonna smooth out the edges of this. Don't even need any water. Just gonna use my fingers. Because I just don't want the edges of that to be sharp or bulky. So I'm also gonna sort of pinch around those edges so that they're thinner. And I almost do this anytime I'm attaching like something made from a slab as like a decorative item, because you just don't really want it sticking off of the surface too far. So that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. Okay, I'm gonna remove my lid and lay my jar on its side, and I've got it on a folded up towel here. So since it's leather hard, we've got to be careful. We don't want to cause any cracking or breaking. So I'm just gonna lay that on. I think I like the positioning of that. Yeah, I think in the middle is about where I want that. And then I'm just gonna trace around it with the needle tool. Really gentle. And then remove it to the side. And then it's just an issue of scoring. Nothing too special, just kind of takes patience with something like this. I wish I had one of those tools that had the multiple needle tips on it, but I don't. I've got to get one of those. New Year's resolution. Don't procrastinate on getting the tools I need. Who else? Who else just is always like, you know, I know there's a tool that would make this so much easier, and then you just don't get it for yourself because you're like, well, I have a needle tool. I don't need to, you know, be too fussy about it. All right, so that's nicely scored. Same thing here. Okay, looks good. Now, I'm not going to use much water here because the piece that I stamped my stamps into was like a fresh piece of slab. So it's not leather hard. So I'm only going to put water here because this is the only material that maybe kind of needs a little bit of moisture added back to it for a good stick. But this piece is still pretty damp. So I'm not going to add any water to this, to my little addition here. Okay, and I'm just gonna, not being afraid to squish my stamps, because I know I stamped them deep enough that I can press over this whole thing to make sure it's nicely attached. I'm gonna pay special attention to the edges, kind of taper them off again, so that they're not standing out too much. And I'm liking kind of the asymmetry of the way this is attached. I'm okay with that. And then I was thinking, okay, this might not work. This might not work out, but I want to try it. I wanted to put like a bit of my fingerprints into this. So the only place I have space really is right here, but I want to see if I can put a bit of my fingerprint. Yeah, there. I think I like that. So that's the completed jar. And I'm excited to use this year, and I'm happy with the way it turned out. So if you make one, let me know how you like it, and I would love to see. So feel free to share if you want. And again, Happy New Year, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye, Potters.